Samuel, let me first start asking you, we heard that laughter at the end of that trailer there. But you've talked also about some of the more shocking, some of the darker sides of DNA discoveries.
I think what really ripped a layer off for me is that you see all these ads, so much marketing from the DNA industry, showing that this is a happy, joyous occasion when your results come in. But there's this other side. 11% of people who take a DNA test find out that one of their parents isn't their biological parent. And that seemed ridiculous to me when I heard that number until it happened twice in my own family. And so there's really not a lot of laughter as you try to solve your mystery DNA, make some huge realizations, and really your whole world can be turned upside down. Who you are can be rewritten by this technology, at-home DNA testing.
So let's talk about your family. I mean, it is actually episode 4, but it is what, as you said, brought you into this investigation. It's about your father, right, and your grandfather. What happened in their investigation?
Well, I come from a Jewish Dutch family on my father's side, very proud to be Jewish and Dutch. And when we get the DNA results back, right away, my father is incredibly upset because it comes back half Jewish, as we'd expect from his mom's side, but half Swedish. And that just makes no sense to us. There are no Swedes in our family. And the DNA test also says that we're Mormon. It's a big surprise for a Jewish family to see Mormon. And of course, Mormon's a religion. You expect an ethno-religious group like Jews to show up on your DNA test, but not a new proselytizing religion like Mormons that take people from all different parts of the world. And so very quickly, my dad knew that something was off. Now, I didn't agree with him. I said, oh, well, maybe Sweden is close to Holland. Maybe we had some ancestors who went back and forth. But the more we looked, we saw that there were no Burkes on our DNA test, not a single Burke. And my last name is Burke. My dad's last name is Burke. And we really started realizing that his father was likely not his father, and we were related to all of these Mormons instead. And it was a very dark period to go through. My dad realizing that the man who raised him, the man who he thought he looked like, was not his father biologically, and that we had this whole other history and a secret in the family that nobody had any idea about.
Mm-hmm. So before we get to you revealing the secret and how you got to know it, let's just play a little clip about this revelation. This is you.
I start looking for photos of this stranger, and when I find a photograph of him, everything stops for a moment. I'll never forget it, because I knew my family's life would never be the same. Right away, I see both my dad and his brother in this man. I see my dad's mouth. I see my Uncle Bill's eyes. I even recognize some of myself in this picture. And as I read more about Roland Perks, I see his family is of mainly Swedish heritage. And it finally all comes together. The man who raised my dad and Uncle Bill was not their biological father.
So Samuel, 2 questions. Who was this man who raised them, and how did the mix-up happen? And how have how is your father, your uncle, how has your family reacted in the aftermath of this knowledge?
Well, it depends who you ask. The man who raised my dad and my Uncle Bill was their dad, but he wasn't their biological father. The way my dad and I look at it, it looks like my grandparents were one of the first couples in Arizona to use artificial insemination. But if you ask my uncle, he doesn't come to the same conclusion. And that's part of the difficulty of this. DNA tests promise to give you all the answers, but really they can create many more questions. And my uncle was wondering, was there somebody else in my grandmother's life? Did they use actually artificial insemination, or did they have a friend who helped them out? We don't get the answers because these people aren't alive anymore. They took the secret to the grave. And as I went through this, the journalist in me really wanted to get the answers and move as quickly as possible. But as I hit the moment that you just played, I realized that I'd upended my father's life. And it was supposed to be a happy ending, like the DNA tests show. But my dad didn't get to meet his biological father. He had died just a couple of years before we made this discovery. And even more heartbreaking, my dad found out that he had a half-brother who had actually taken his life just a couple of months before we made this discovery. And it was really gut-wrenching for me to know that, in a way, I took a part of my dad's father, my grandfather, away from him, that he wasn't his biological father, and that my dad didn't get to have the happy ending, meeting another sibling. And I really came to regret buying my dad the DNA test, because he would have just gone along his life thinking this other story that he had been told and lived was the true story.
So that really raises a huge number of issues there that, on the one hand, you want to know, on the other hand, the consequences can be so dire. I think that, in the interest of full disclosure, you are part of the CNN family. You were this program's first social media producer, and then you became tech and business correspondent, and now you've launched your own, investigative and podcast series in this respect right now. And I think it's fascinating because you don't only look into your own family. You have one episode called The Girl Next Door. Tell us about Anna. I'm going to play a little clip, and then you can tell us about this story. Because again, it's about secrets and lies and, not knowing finally what they're going to find out.
I just wept. And even thinking about it now, it's painful. It's sad. It's so hurtful that someone just could somebody have not even left me a note? It's so painful because I don't personally want to live in the rearview mirror, but I have put myself in the rearview mirror because I need to make sense of a lot of things so I can continue to move forward at this point.
So Samuel, in short, this is your first episode, and this is a woman whose mother, in fact, had an affair with the next door neighbor. Explain the rest of the story and how they are now.
Well, the part that's so difficult about all this isn't just the proximity for Aina, the woman in the podcast. It's that her best friend, her whole life, is the girl next door, the daughter of who she finds out to be her biological father. I mean, Christiane, imagine taking a DNA test and finding out that your best friend is your half-sister. Her dad was having an affair with your mom. And I think what's so mind-blowing about Aina's story is that everybody knew except for Aina. When she goes and starts telling people, everybody is very unsurprised. They think this is totally logical. She doesn't look like the people in her family. She looks like her neighbor. She looks like her best friend. But it's something much deeper than all of this, because Aina's had this disconnect her entire life. She's always known that something was off. People in her family treated her like the bastard child. Those are her words, not mine. But she never could put her finger on it. Why am I treated differently? Why do people look at me differently? Why does my mom's family, even though her mom had the affair, why does my mom's family treat me differently? And only when she gets the DNA result does it all come together. But the proximity of it all, the twisted nature of it, and the fact that her mom never told her, even though she had all these question marks, really puts into question her whole relationship with her mom, who's no longer around. And so you have to rebuild these relationships with people who aren't even on Earth anymore. And of course, take your best friend, tell her the truth, say, well, all the people on my DNA test have your last name, and try to build a sisterhood, which thankfully for Aina and her best friend, half-sister, is exactly what they do.
Well, that's a beautiful ending to that very sad story. And as you say, a lot of people who find out their secrets don't want to admit them, that there have been extramarital affairs or whatever, as is in this case. Here's an incredible statistic. 11% of the people who take these DNA tests discover one of their parents is not their biological parent. What sort of reaction have you had since this series has dropped? Now that all the people who you've talked to have seen how you've produced the series and have seen each other's stories as well, or will be as they drop?
Well, that number that you just stated, which is from a scientific study, seemed ridiculous to me, Christiane. 11% of people finding out that one of their parents isn't their biological parent. But then it happened twice in my family. My dad had the result that we've talked about, but my mom also discovered a sister that she didn't know about. And my new aunt, She found out that her father was not her biological father and that my mom's dad was her father. And I think what's been most incredible about going on this DNA journey is that no matter where I go, and now that the series has launched, everybody seems to have one of these shocking results. Now, of course, I was your producer for a long time, and you and I were at dinner one time, and I was telling you about this DNA discovery in my family as it was happening. And one of the people in the podcast is a woman who was sitting next to us at dinner who heard my loud voice talking about this DNA result and came over and shared her shocking DNA result. And my point in telling you that is that no matter where you go, whether you publish a podcast or you have a discussion over dinner about your DNA, your heritage, your family secrets, there is somebody sitting right next to you who's experiencing this. The DNA industry makes it look like it's all a lot of fun, but huge swaths of people are having their lives completely rewritten by this technology. And I think for me, having covered technology for so long, I've started to realize more and more that social media and so many of the other parts of technology, including at-home DNA testing, are completely changing our lives. If we didn't have these tests, if we didn't have Twitter or Facebook, which you know I champion so much, you know, our lives would be incredibly different. That day at the Capitol would have looked incredibly different. My life, my dad's life would have looked incredibly different. Technology is changing our world in ways that I don't think we could ever see coming, and I think it's getting worse and worse.
Well, let me then finally ask you, because you know there's a lot to be said for finding these secrets out, but now there's a lot to be said also about protecting privacy. That story you tell about the restaurant is, that nothing's private anymore in the world. But 23andMe, one of these operations, is apparently going to be acquired or going to a deal with the Branson Acquisition Group, and there are concerns about what happens to all this genetic data and information. Just quickly, in the 30 seconds we've got left, is that a worry?
Oh, it's absolutely a worry. But what I always tell people is we can't even have this discussion because people say, well, what are the terms of service? As soon as one of these companies, like 23andMe, which is valued at $3.5 billion, is acquired by another company, all of the agreements change. What you signed changes, your DNA goes into other people's hands. And so there's nothing even to discuss because we don't know what's happening. And so that's why I'm focused instead on what I know for sure, that our lives, our heritage, our families are suddenly changing with these tests.
And Suddenly Family, that's your podcast series. Samuel, thank you for joining us.